Hi, my name is Linda Poole, the founder and artistic creative director of the Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival. It's an exciting time for us right now as we plan the annual celebration. And it's always a rush to stay ahead of nature because it's all starting to come to life now. So if I ever feel a bit overwhelmed, I just slow things down and take a few deep breaths. Sometimes I'll even go outside to be in nature because I immediately feel better. So wherever you are, inside, just gently close your eyes. And please keep them closed until I say, open your eyes for the surprise. Take a few slow, relaxed, deep belly breaths with an inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. And slowly open your eyes to observe one of the first signs of spring in Metro Vancouver, the cherry blossom. It all happens very slowly at the end of March or early April, depending how cold the winter is. As the days get longer with more daylight hours and it gets warmer, the buds begin to show pink and magically burst into bloom, just like that. The cherry blossoms are so beautiful. You might wonder, how can they be real? They make me feel so happy, and I hope all the cherry blossoms you'll see today in our video will make you happy too. And know that spring is coming soon, because nothing remains the same. Winter always changes into spring. This is a Vancouver story, how one person with a good idea can make a difference. When you really believe, dreams do come true. Because I brought a new idea for my city from far away, where the culture is quite different from ours. My Japanese friend Nobu-san, he showed me some beautiful photos of cherry blossoms during the Sakura festivals of Japan. And that's all it took to inspire me to dream of creating the Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival. And now you'll see evidence of cherry blossoms across the city in our murals, SkyTrain stations, art galleries, shops, restaurants, and even in the Vancouver Police Museum. In Japan, there's a legend that each spring, the tree spirit fairy hovers low in the warm sky and awakens the sleeping cherry trees to life with her delicate breath. This folk song comes from the traditional storytelling of the small island of Okinawa, as the people wanted to show their gratitude to the land for all the beauty it produces and celebrate togetherness. You'll notice they do this with a formal, deep bow, because the Japanese have a deep reverence and appreciation for nature. Japan has the most flowering cherry trees in the whole world. For more than 1,000 years, the cherry blossom has been universally admired around the world for its beauty. The cherry blossom has inspired ancient poets in Japan and around the world to capture their beauty in poetry, dance, theater, and in paintings. The cherry blossom is kind of that moment of awe, just like what you experienced with the time lapse of the cherry blossom coming into bloom. It is a symbol of beauty, good fortune, and the fragility of life. Because the cherry blossom is so fragile, the blossoms only last about 10 days. In this way, the cherry blossom teaches us it is important to treasure every precious moment before it's gone. It's also a universal symbol of friendship, which is why we like to say, there is no stranger under the cherry tree. It was about 100 years ago when Vancouver sister city in Japan, Yokohama and Kobe, sent us 500 cherry trees as a gift of friendship. Vancouverites fell in love immediately with this flowering tree, so Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation planted them in our parks and along our streets to make streets friendlier and more beautiful. The cherry tree also grows in other countries like Taiwan, South Korea, China, the United States, and parts of Europe, where there are also annual celebrations. The flowers come in various shades of pink, from hot pink, pale pink, to a blush of pink, to milk white. There are hundreds of different varieties of the flowering cherry trees that produce only flowers and no fruit. The festival discovered 54 different kinds of cherry trees, and there are more than 43,000 flowering cherry trees in the city. Each cultivar or variety grows in a different shape and has a name. One of our common cherry trees, the akebono, has an umbrella shape with branches that invite you under its canopy, while others are tall and slender, vase-shaped, and some have branches weeping downward. But they grow to be very large, beautiful trees. Meet the Grandpapa cherry, as he's fondly called, and you'll find him in Queen Elizabeth Park, and he's almost 90 years old. Can you begin to understand why cherry blossoms are so awe-inspiring? Egan is a horticulturalist who's going to talk to you about the botany of the cherry tree, which is very interesting.
What is the first thing that comes to mind when you try to imagine a Japanese cherry tree? Is it the blossoms? You can easily recognize a cherry tree when it is in full bloom, but can you identify one in the winter when there are no flowers or leaves? Instead of flowers, let's look at identification features of cherry trees that can be seen in the winter. Try to remember the 3 B's of winter ID: bark, buds, and branches. Bark is beautiful. This is what the bark of a cherry tree looks like. Compare this with the bark for some other trees. Some trees have very smooth bark that looks like elephant skin. As the trunk expands, the bark on some trees cracks and becomes fissured. The bark on some trees grows outwardly and develops deeper, furrowed cracks in the bark. On this tree, the bark breaks apart vertically and horizontally, leaving these square-shaped plates of bark. I love this bark. The plates are colored like avocado camouflage. This bark grows out and breaks away into blocky shapes. And the bark of this tree peels away in ruffled curls. This tree has long strips of fibrous bark. Whoa! This bark looks like it has been crimped. I love the repeating chevron shapes on the sides of these bark ridges. Cool. Horizontal bands of olive and plum colors. Intersecting vertical ridges and small bands of round lenticels. Do you know what lentil cells are? Lenticels are porous structures on the bark that allow the exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. Think of lenticels like little breathing holes. Different tree species will feature lenticels of many shapes and sizes. Look at these long, narrow, horizontal lenticels on the Himalayan birch. I love the color contrast between the silver-colored bark and these coppery lenticels. Okay, so now let's take a look at the bark of cherry trees. Do you see the broad bands of lenticels? And in between the lenticels, the bark is smooth and kind of like a mahogany color. And it tends to peel off in horizontal strips. The bark on younger trees and younger cherry branches will have smaller coppery colored lenticels and much smoother, almost satiny bark that can range in color from medium brown to a reddish mahogany. Older branches will exhibit rougher horizontal bands of lenticels. Over time, branches can develop vertical fissures, and moss and lichen will also grow on the surface of the bark. This doesn't cause the tree any harm. Now that you know what to look for, you should have no problem recognizing cherry trees from a distance just by looking at the bark. They may be small, but looking at the buds is a great way to identify cherry trees. When identifying plants, one of the first things to look at is the buds and determine whether the buds are spaced alternately along the stem or in opposite pairs. Here is an example of alternate bud arrangement. Notice on this cherry tree twig how each single bud occurs on its own, along different sides of the stem. All cherry trees will have alternately arranged buds like this. Cherry trees are in the rose family, and all plants in the rose family feature alternately arranged buds. Here is an example of a tree with oppositely arranged buds. Notice how the buds occur in pairs on opposite sides of the stem. With a few exceptions, a plant species will share the feature of either having opposite buds or alternate buds. Not all trees with alternate buds are going to be a cherry tree, but it is a good first step in the process of correct identification. When looking at buds on this cherry twig, it is also helpful to be able to tell the difference between vegetative buds and reproductive buds. Vegetative buds will produce leaves in the spring, and they are generally smaller than reproductive buds. And reproductive buds will produce flowers in the spring, and they're going to usually be fatter and will often occur in clusters. Reproductive flowering buds will occur in dense clusters on shorter lateral branch shoots like this. Look at how many flowers this branch will produce in the spring. And what do you see when you look more closely at the twig? Lenticels. This tree also has clustered buds at the end of short shoots, but how can you tell that it isn't a cherry? Notice how the shoots are arranged oppositely on the stem? Not a cherry, they're alternate. This tree has alternately arranged buds and shoots, but look closely at the buds. Do they look like cherry buds? If you said no, you're correct. Alternate buds, but notice how long and pointy they are. The stem also grows in a divergent zigzag line. Not a cherry. Pretty neat long and pointy buds though. Another twig with alternate buds and zigzagging stem. Definitely not a cherry. Wow, fuzzy buds. Pretty cool, but not a cherry. Look at the reproductive flowering buds of Pacific dogwood. And this is a reproductive flowering bud of an eastern dogwood. The bud scales on this dogwood cover and protect the bud through winter. These buds look like fingernails, or a duckbill, or the bill of a platypus. Aha! A cherry tree. Now that you have seen a lot of different tree buds, it'll be easier to recognize a cherry tree just by its buds. Alternate bud arrangement, small vegetative buds, and clusters of larger, oval, pointy, reddish-colored reproductive flowering buds. Some trees like this oak will look similar, alternate bud arrangement and clustered, But come on, those aren't cherry buds. The color and shape is all wrong, and if you look closely, even the bud scales are arranged in a different pattern. Let's look at cherry branches now. What makes a branch beautiful is its uninterrupted line from the point of attachment right the way to the tip. Different species will exhibit their own unique character in the way that the branches grow. It is fun to clearly differentiate each assembly of branches. The canopy of a cherry tree will be composed of many large ascending primary scaffold branches. The secondary lateral branches on cherry trees tend to grow out in more of a horizontally layered pattern. Now, look at how the smaller tertiary lateral twigs are assembled. Notice the branch density, the branch posture, the branch line, the angle of branch attachment. Every individual tree is unique, and yet each species will exhibit some characteristic growth patterns. Not only do different tree species have unique growth habits, but they will also grow into similar forms or shapes. Flowering cherry trees tend to form wide and rounded crowns like this one here. Another really common aspect to the form of flowering cherry trees is that they are almost always trained or grafted so that a single and straight trunk lifts the canopy above the ground so that you can walk underneath the tree. One thing that makes trees so interesting is that with the element of time, their growth habit and form changes as they grow. Here you can see a young tree in the foreground to compare with a beautiful and mature tree. When cherry trees are young, it is like they are excited about growing upwards towards the sky, and their branches exhibit more of an ascending growth habit. As cherry trees age, the vertical growth slows down and they relax and spread out more horizontally. Notice that both of these trees are trained and grafted onto a single and straight trunk. The young tree looks a little bit lanky, but its proportions will fill out over time. Just like everything in nature, nothing stays the same for very long. Here is another example comparing two trees of different ages. There's a young tree in the foreground reaching for the sky with unbridled optimism, and a mature tree behind it, more content and wise, a witness to the time that it has spent in this location. You can see the evidence of youth in older trees if you look closely at their structure. It is important to understand that not all trees look the same though. There are many varieties of flowering cherry trees, and they all have quite distinctive growth habits and forms. This weeping cherry is trained up on a single trunk. It also has ascending primary scaffold branches, but the secondary and tertiary branches tend to arch over and weep, like water cascading over a waterfall. Once you get good at being able to recognize cherry trees from other species, you can then learn to identify the various unique cultivated varieties. All right, now let's look at a few trees and see if we can tell whether they are cherry trees or not. What about this tree? Okay, so its trunk transitions into a central leader that is a bit more dominant than the other branches. That's not the way most cherries grow. The branches are ascending, but at a steeper angle than cherry trees. And the lateral branches don't seem to be spreading out horizontally like most cherry trees. It looks too tall to be a flowering cherry tree, doesn't it? And the branch assemblies aren't forming in the same way as a cherry. The branch lines look different. Okay, that spiky fruit is pretty cool, but it's definitely not a cherry. Now I know it is definitely not a cherry. Pretty cool bark though. This is a London plane tree. What about this one? All right, it is multi-stem like a cherry tree, but everything is growing up at a pretty steep angle. It also looks a little bit big for a flowering cherry. Looking more closely, that fissured bark is most certainly not from a cherry tree. And to be totally sure, when you look up at the branch silhouette, you can see that the buds and twigs are arranged in opposite pairs, not a cherry. This is a Japanese maple. Okay, what about this group of trees? You can even see from here that the canopy is made up of multiple ascending primary scaffold branches, and the shape, it looks right for a cherry. And they are all trained up on a single straight trunk, just like cherry trees. When you look more closely, you can see the horizontal bands of lenticels on the bark. Yup, alternately arranged twigs and buds. Swollen clusters of reproducing flowering buds on short lateral shoots. Definitely passes the cherry checklist. How about these trees? They sort of look like cherries, but the branches seem to be ascending at a steeper angle than other flowering cherry trees. But that sure looks like cherry bark. And the bud arrangement is alternate. And yep, clusters of reddish colored reproductive flowering buds on short shoots. This is a variety of cherry that is selected for its unusual upright growth habit. A little bit different, but definitely a cherry. So in the winter, take a walk around your neighborhood or a local park and see if you can find the cherry trees. It'll be fun to go back in the spring and see if you were right.
The Japanese have a very deep love of cherry blossoms and the cherry tree, or Sakura, as it is called in Japanese. When Sakura begins to bloom, everyone seems to catch spring fever. They rush out to see them, to celebrate together, as they know how quickly the blossoms fall to the ground. There are Sakura festivals all over Japan. It's a major spring celebration. People go out with their friends and family, picnicking, painting pictures of the scene, photographing, writing poetry, enjoying music, and just having fun while admiring the beauty of these short-lived blossoms. These large cherry blossom viewing parties are called hanami. Many people gather to enjoy the fresh air and friends while sitting on tarps as the ground is still damp. And with a pink canopy overhead, it's like being in a fairyland. I'd like you to meet our Japanese friend, Mika, who's going to share some of her childhood memories of Sakura in her homeland of Japan.
Hello everyone, my name is Mika and I'm a Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival volunteer. My favorite flower is the cherry blossom. The cherry blossom tree reminds me of my home country, Japan. The word for cherry tree in Japanese is Sakura. In fact, the cherry blossom is the national flower of Japan. They are the symbol of the life for Japanese people. They bloom in a short period, so they remind us that nothing is permanent. Most Japanese people enjoy having picnics with their family, friends, and colleagues under the blossoming cherry trees in spring. This traditional custom is called hanami or ohanami in Japanese. As a child, I remember my family and relatives have gathered and shared the special lunch box called ohanami bento every year like others. I enjoy eating and chatting with people who I loved under the beautiful tree. The spring wind sometimes made a pink-colored blizzard of petals, which are breathtaking. The cherry blossom bloom between late March and early April, at the same time as schools in Japan start the school year. School starts in April, you say? Yes, schools in Japan start in April, not in September. Maybe that's why I see cherry blossom starting to bloom every time. I feel that something new is starting in my life. When I came to Canada, I didn't expect to see cherry blossom trees in Vancouver. Therefore, I was surprised to find them growing in my new home of Vancouver. Every year I see this gorgeous tree in spring. I miss my family and friends in Japan, but these beautiful trees always cheer me up and make me so happy. Although I'm away from my home country, Sakura reminds me of the memory of my childhood, family, and friends. On the other hand, I feel lucky to live in this beautiful city where I can enjoy 4 seasons through nature. If you ever experience difficult times, Please remember, as we believe in Japan, the cherry blossoms are a symbol of life and nothing is permanent, so difficult time will pass.
It took many years before Vancouver began to celebrate our cherry trees with a Cherry Blossom Festival, modeled after these celebrations in Japan. The Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival is unique and celebrates spring and our cherry blossoms West Coast style with everyone. We're very grateful to Japan for the gift of cherry trees and their cultural traditions. Every spring, the festival remembers the generosity of Japan and Canada's special friendship with Japan. So celebrating friendship is a very important part of our festival. Our Vancouver mayor proclaimed April as Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival Month, uniting Vancouver's diverse neighborhoods, residents, and visitors in celebrating the arrival of spring with its blossoming cherry trees. In a normal year, the festival celebrates in many different ways and always in beautiful venues. We kick off with the Cherry Jam downtown free concert outdoors with live music, dance, and song. And in this serene setting where I am today, we present Sakura Days Japan Fair in Van Dusen Botanical Garden with our partner, Japan Fair Association of Vancouver. We also bike under the blossoms. We sing to them. We even have our own official song, Cherry Blossoms for You and Me. And the cherry blossoms sometimes inspire us to dance for joy because we're all crazy for cherry blossoms here in Vancouver. As the cherry blossom doesn't close to sleep at night, we can even illuminate them after dark with a special light display. Throughout the festival, people take thousands of photos of the cherry blossoms and people having fun with them, as well as writing poetry on the cherry blossom theme in the Japanese form of haiku. Haiku is at the heart of the festival. Our Haiku Invitational Poetry Contest receives haiku from 42 different countries, from all different ages. Here are a few poems from the youth category under the age of 18. Cherry Blossoms, Interrupting Her Fairy Tale, by Andrea of Romania. Early morning, the cherry blossom opens my hand, by Daniel from New Zealand. Cherry petals renewing the scarecrow's shabby coat, by another Andrea of Romania. So we invite you to try your hand at writing haiku for the Haiku Invitational. Michael is a haiku poet and a judge, and he's going to get you started with some tips on how to haiku.
Hello everyone. When my daughter was 10 years old, she wrote a handout called How to Haiku. When I teach haiku to adults, I have a haiku checklist I often share, but even the adults prefer my daughter's handout, and you might like it too. What she wrote is informative, so I'll share it with you to help you learn haiku. We'll also hear cherry blossom haiku written by youth who have entered the Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival's annual Haiku Invitational Contest. So, let's get started. You may be wondering, what is haiku? That's the first question my daughter answered. She said, haiku is a short poem from Japan. In English, they're usually in 3 lines with no titles or rhyme.
Under a tree, struggling with my homework, a blossom falls on me.
You don't have to count syllables in English. Does that last statement surprise you? It surprises some people because they've been taught that haiku counts syllables in a 5-7-5 pattern. That makes sense in Japanese, but not so much in English. That's because the sounds they count are not the same as our syllables, and their words often have more syllables than our words for the same thing in English. For example, when we say the word cuckoo, they would say hototogisu, which has more sounds. Most Japanese words are like that, so they use up their 17 sounds more quickly. We can see another difference in the word haiku itself. In English, the word haiku is counted as 2 syllables, haiku. But in Japanese, it actually counts as 3 sounds, ha-i-ku. It's not how you say it, but it is how it's counted. You can write haiku in a 5-7-5 pattern if you want to, but why not try shorter haiku? This way, your haiku will be closer to the size of what they write in Japanese. A friend of mine who lives in Japan once wrote in a book about haiku that if you write 17 syllables in English, that's sometimes enough for 2 haiku in Japanese. So 5-7-5 is not required in English, though a lot of people think it is. Writing a shorter poem is perfectly fine. So don't worry about counting syllables. There are actually more important things, targets for haiku, to aim for, as we're about to see.
The inspiration for my wardrobe choice today, pink cherry blossoms.
The next thing my daughter wrote was how we should write a haiku with your 5 senses, a reference to the season, and in 2 parts. We'll learn a bit more about these targets in a moment, but first, here's a famous haiku from Japan, included in my daughter's handout. It's by the poet Issa, and here's what he wrote more than 200 years ago. Snow melting. The village is flooded with children. For a moment you think, oh no, the village is flooded. And then you get a happy surprise. Ah, the village is flooded with children. Why do you think that happened? I think it's because the winter has been long and cold, and now the snow is melting. It must be warm out, and all the children in the village are rushing outdoors to enjoy the warm weather, maybe splashing in puddles. And did you notice the season? The poem mentions snow, but it's not winter. The snow is melting, so it must be spring. Haiku asks you to pay close attention to subtleties like this.
When everything seems unlucky, a cherry blossom lands in my hand.
Here's the next thing my daughter wrote in her haiku handout about seasonal reference. She said that haiku traditionally refer to the season in some way. You could name the season, such as spring, summer, fall, or winter, or you can refer to something that is typical of that season. In Japanese haiku, my daughter wrote, a season word is called a kigo. That's spelled K-I-G-O. It's a word that refers to the time of the year, the way snow tells us it's winter, or how certain flowers represent spring. She also said, use just one seasonal reference in your haiku, which is good advice, to give your haiku a sharper focus. You don't want to write about too many things.
After the storm, making blossom angels.
The next subject my daughter wrote about is how haiku rely on your senses. Your 5 senses, she wrote, are sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. In haiku, you want to show readers what you were sensing at a particular moment. And that moment is an important idea too, because haiku are usually about things that occur in short moments of personal experience. They can record things that happen to you every day, such as eating a sandwich, running to catch a bus, or watching a leaf fall to the pavement. These are all seeds for haiku, and it's up to you to water them so they grow into haiku.
A bird bath under a tree filled with cherry blossoms.
Haiku are usually not things you completely make up or imagine. You can do that in other kinds of writing, but a haiku wants to show you ordinary things in ordinary life so you can appreciate them more. The famous writer Jack Kerouac said, "Haiku should be as simple as porridge." Do you have porridge for breakfast sometimes? It's not a special food, it's just something ordinary. And you can write about ordinary things like that in your haiku, things that you experience through your five senses. And you can write about them in a simple way. My daughter said, see if you can include 1 or 2 lines about at least one of your senses in your haiku.
Cherry blossoms. My father's camera clicks again.
The next thing my daughter wrote about might be the hardest challenge of all. But don't think of it as something that's hard to do, but something to try to see if it works. My daughter wrote that Japanese haiku are divided into 2 parts by what is called a kireji, or cutting word. That's spelled K-I-R-E-J-I. My daughter explained that we don't have cutting words in English, but we can still give our haiku 2 parts. She means that there's a pause in the poem, making the haiku feel like it's cut in 2. One of those parts might be just a fragment of a sentence, such as spring breeze. That could be the first line of your haiku, and in this case, it also lets others know the season. Then, the rest of the poem could present something else that's happening to you. For example, you could write about the pull of your dog on its leash, and that would fit the spring season because that pull is youthful and energetic, like spring. To demonstrate, here's a haiku my daughter wrote.
Breezy morning, a Yorkie puppy catching cherry petals.
Can you hear the 2 parts? The first part is the breezy morning, which gives us a context or setting. The second part is the Yorkie puppy catching cherry petals. When you put them together, the 2 parts paint a picture that most people can relate to. In this case, she didn't say spring breeze. Cherry blossoms appear at the end of the poem, which will tell us the season, so she didn't need to say spring in the first line. But we can easily see this image, can't we? A good haiku wants us to see and feel what the poet experienced, and it also wants to make us care about the image or experience in the poem. In this way, we can share the same experience as the poet and feel empathy and connection, even joy, in knowing that others have lives similar to ours.
The popular girl and the goth girl are friends under blossoms.
Do you think you could try haiku too? At the end of her handout, my daughter wrote, "Now it's your turn. Can you write a haiku for each of your 5 senses?" And she closed by emphasizing 2 important recommendations. First, don't forget to have 2 parts and a season word in each poem. And then she said, have fun.
Cherry petals, floating on the wind, first dance lesson.
And you know what else I'd say? Share your poems. That's probably the most important step with haiku. In Japan, for centuries, haiku poets have shared their poems in a writing game called renga, and a friendly haiku meeting called a kukai. And today, we can share haiku in creative ways too. How might you share your haiku? Write a few haiku today and share them with your friends or family, maybe with a photograph or painting, or in a folded paper or other artwork. Things that happen to you every day, today, are seeds for haiku, and it's up to you to help them grow.
Moving day. Taking the last selfie with the cherry tree.
So here's a summary of what we've talked about today. Haiku is short poetry from Japan, and you can write haiku in English. Haiku can help you pay closer attention to the world around you, and also pay attention to your feelings in reaction to your experiences. But here's a final tip. Don't write about your feelings. Instead, write about what caused your feelings. That can make a world of difference. This way, the people who hear or read your haiku can have their own feelings in response to your poem. That's the secret of haiku. I hope this overview of haiku poetry inspires you to look for haiku seeds in your everyday life, whether it's school or work, in a city or out in nature. With practice, you can water and fertilize your haiku seeds and make them grow into haiku poems that you can enjoy sharing with others. Thank you. Now write some haiku.
You can read hundreds of haiku on our website at vcbf.ca. You have lots of time to practice, as the deadline to submit your poem is the beginning of June. We recognize the top 6 poems and many more in other categories, because it's not about winning. It's about the practice of writing haiku and noticing everything around you in nature, at home, and at school, with all of your 5 senses. So I hope you continue to discover haiku seeds on every sensory awareness walk you take from now on. On the festival's neighborhood maps at our website, vcbf.ca, you can see displays of cherry trees that bloom all across Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. If you should ever discover some cherry trees blooming which are not on our map, please email us its location with a photo and be a good Cherry Scout volunteer. We'd appreciate that. With this bloom video, we hope this is the start of a long friendship and invite you to be a part of the Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival every April. You can submit your own haiku or a class haiku. You can submit your blossom photo of your class hanami to our virtual mosaic photo collage. It's really cool this year, as when you submit to the BC Blossom Photo Watch, you'll actually be able to see your photo come to life in real time with the many other photos. And now that you're part of the Cherry Blossom family, you can help the Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival spread cherry blossom love and joy everywhere. On behalf of the Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival, I'd like to acknowledge the funding support of the David and Dorothy Lamb Foundation for making this bloom video possible. I'd like to share the late Honorable Dr. David Lamb's cherry blossom philosophy of life with you in his own words. When you promise to do something, give it all you've got. The cherry gives us everything, its color, beauty, and fragrance, and asks for nothing in return. We should all live like the cherry. Now, fasten your seatbelts while Patrick, our drone pilot, takes you on a flight right through those cherry blossoms. So have fun and happy spring to you.